Hello and welcome to SmartOrg's webinar series. In this webinar, we're excited to present Temperince Morgan talking about making rigorous portfolio decisions in a complex mission-driven environment. It's really exciting to have the Nature Conservancy here and to be able to talk about how they've applied our kind of methods to make better decisions around their investments in conservation. As we get started here, let me give you a little bit background on SmartOrg. SmartOrg connects innovation and finance. Our portfolio evaluation platform builds your capability to align on how to drive the upside and on where and how much to invest. And I'm David Matheson, President and CEO of the company. A few housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, on your control panel, you should be able to see a question box. Go ahead and type questions at any time, and we will be processing them, and at the end there'll be an extensive Q&A section. We will also take questions along the way if that seems appropriate. If you need help at any time, next to your name, you should be able to raise your hand, and we will do some private chat with you to try to get that sorted out. Finally, during the course of the webinar, we'll be doing polls from time to time. And so let's start with one to kind of get this warmed up. One of the neat things about the Nature Conservancy, of course, is that they're a very mission-driven organization. And they've applied these methods about two kind of mission-driven problems. But of course, many organizations have a strong element of mission. So I'm just would like to poll on how important is mission to your organization. So the kind of company you're with. So please go ahead and select one. Not much. You're a traditional for-profit organization. That's a 1. A 3 is a mission-driven for-profit organization, but with a kind of triple bottom line. So mission and financial elements are kind of equal. And then finally, a traditional nonprofit focused on delivering on the mission. So go ahead and pick something. And I can see people are settling in here. A few more seconds. Go ahead and pick your last. A couple more people have snuck in. All right, I'm closing the poll and sharing the result here. So you can see that 40% of the audience is a traditional for-profit organization, and another 40% are in the middle with triple bottom lines or mission-driven somehow, and a couple in the middle. And we have no other sort of pure nonprofits. So let's go back to the slides. The next slide. I first met Temperince in conjunction with this work. And I was really struck by her commitment to the Nature Conservancy mission. She's a 4th-generation Floridian. And I think, like many of us, has seen a lot of change in her life. I remember what the area I grew up in used to look like, and I'm in California. There were a lot of orchards in the Bay Area, and they've become shopping mall and suburban sprawl, and it's very heartbreaking in a way, and I think each of us have had the experience like this. Temperince grew up in Florida and saw forests being clear-cut for development, and I think, unlike many of us, chose to go and do something about it. And make sure that that wilderness experience was still available and that people still had access to the great things that nature provides. So she's a director, executive director of the Florida chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and has been doing this work for a very long time. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome Temperince and pass it on to her.
Great, thanks, David. And good morning to everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you this morning. And given that it sounds like based on the first survey that David teed up, the Nature Conservancy is the only true nonprofit represented on the call this morning, I thought I would start by giving you a little bit of background on who we are and what we do, which will probably provide some more context as we get into some of the decision analysis aspects of our work. So let me start by telling you a little bit about the mission of the Nature Conservancy. So as a Nature Conservancy, we have this very simple yet very expansive mission statement of protecting the lands and waters on which all life depends. So you can probably appreciate that, like I said, is a very expansive body of work that we've chosen to undertake. And at the Nature Conservancy, our vision is that people and nature thrive together. So our goal is not to push out all the people and make sure nature can thrive when we're all not around. Our vision is to ensure that people and our economies can thrive while at the same time protecting our natural resources so we can enjoy them and benefit from them. So a pretty practical approach to conservation at the Nature Conservancy. All right, so to tell you a little bit more about who we are, the Nature Conservancy is the world's largest environmental organization, although I suspect that there may be many of you who have not heard of us or are not that familiar with us. We were founded in 1951, so we've been around for a long time, 67 years. And we work in all 50 states and in 72 countries around the world. So again, we're a global organization and we have staff on the ground working in places all around the world trying to ensure that we're doing good by our natural resources. Everything we do at the Nature Conservancy is science-based. We believe in making sure that all of our projects and our positions that we take are based on really good science and data. So we have over 600 scientists on staff, but we have nearly 4,000 total employees, again, deployed around the world, working in all these various places that we work. So a fairly large organization from a staffing standpoint, maybe not in comparison to some of yours, but certainly from an environmental nonprofit standpoint, a very large organization. We are, and this probably sets us apart from some of the other environmental organizations out there, we are very relationship-based, and we pride ourselves on being intensely pragmatic and being collaborative and non-confrontational. So we're not the type of organization that is out suing folks. We're the type of organization that partners with corporations, academia, government agencies, and other nonprofits around the world to try to come up with win-wins and good solutions that everyone can feel good about deploying. So we rely really heavily on our relationships, and we have hundreds of organizations around the world that we partner with, thousands of volunteers who work on our behalf, and well over 1 million members of the organization around the world. We also consistently rank among the top 25 revenue generating charities in the US, just to kind of give you a sense of what type of organization we are. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we do. So I already mentioned that we pride ourselves on being a very collaborative organization, and ultimately our goal is to work with people to demonstrate that saving nature is the smartest investment we can make. So we bring a lot of economic data to bear to demonstrate that nature has a bearing on our economies, and protecting nature can actually benefit our economies. And we do that in a number of different areas. When we first began many years ago in 1951, we primarily focused on protecting land. So we saw specific critical lands out there that had the risk of being developed, and we worked to protect those by either acquiring them and helping them become a part of a national estate or state park, or acquiring them for ourselves and using them as a nature preserve. But over the years, our work has expanded far beyond just protecting land. We realize there's a lot more conservation issues out there other than just the need to protect land, and that most of these issues are highly interrelated. So in order to make sure that our lands are being well protected, we also need to make sure those lands have sufficient water, for example. So we now work in 5 very broad areas around the world, as shown here on the slide, starting with climate. So we work around the world on climate issues with the goal of supporting global climate action and mitigating climate impacts, as well as adapting to those impacts that we're already seeing. As I mentioned, land protection, we continue to do land protection as we always have, although we're getting more and more creative in how we're approaching that all the while. We are now working in cities, so this is one of our newer arenas of work, is recognizing that Most people live in cities and draw on our natural resources to live their lives, and that nature can really help us solve some of the problems that we are experiencing in our cities, and that we really have a need to reconnect people to nature, because so many people that live in cities or born and raised in cities are fairly disconnected from the importance and value of nature. So we're working to reconnect people in cities. As I already mentioned, fresh water, obviously it's really important that we all have fresh water to drink. Agriculture has water for our food crops, and that nature has enough water to continue to supply us with all of its benefits. So we work on all of those issues. And then lastly, we work on healthy coasts, making sure that we have healthy coast and marine systems that can support both thriving ecosystems, but also provide us with all the benefits that we rely on from our oceans, like the opportunity to go recreational fishing or swimming or surfing or whatever the case may be in your life. So those are the broad areas of work that the Nature Conservancy engages in. And hopefully that gives you some sense for who we are as an organization and the type of work that we do. But in this presentation, I'm going to focus a lot more on two specific chapters of the Nature Conservancy. As indicated when SmartOrg advertised this webinar, I'm going to focus in on the Florida chapter, where I'm the executive director, and the Caribbean chapter, my colleagues just to the south of us, because our two chapters collaborated and entered into a joint contract with SmartOrg to do some work that I'll be covering with you. All right, so just to show you a map so you can see Florida there. Hopefully everyone knows where Florida is in the US, and the Bahamas there to the southeast of Florida. So in Florida, our chapter has been around a long time. We've been around since 1961, so we're one of the older chapters within the Nature Conservancy. And as a result, we are working in all 5 of the areas that I just mentioned on the last slide. So we started focusing on land, but over the years, we've expanded to work in those 5 broad areas. Whereas in the Caribbean is a bit of a newer chapter. They haven't been around quite as long. And it's a more complex area because there's actually 17 countries and territories with different governance in play across the Caribbean. So a newer program with more complex governance. And so that chapter is focusing a little more narrowly on issues related to coastal and marine concerns, as well as climate issues, and has a little less work involved in land and freshwater and some of the other things I mentioned earlier. So our 2 chapters, Florida and the Caribbean, decided to join forces because myself as executive director in Florida and my colleague Luis Solorzano, who is the executive director in the Caribbean, took on our roles as executive directors at about the same time. So we both came into these roles about 3.5 years ago. And upon arrival, we started having some of the same observations about our chapters and some of the challenges our chapters faced. And as we started sharing those challenges with each other, we realized we had a lot in common and the opportunity to really collaborate on tackling some of these challenges together. So just want to spend a few minutes talking about some of the challenges that we observed that led us to focus on decision analysis and portfolio management. So the first challenge we had was way too many projects in our portfolio, but not enough resources to execute on all of those. And that's a challenge that's easy to encounter, frankly, in the environmental space, because as you can appreciate, if you think about it, and if you think about those 5 broad issues, there are a tremendous amount of conservation challenges out there across the planet. And can we tackle them all? No, we can't. We don't have enough resources in our organization to tackle them all. So we have to be smart about which ones we choose to focus on. And an organization that is mission driven and has staff as passionate as we do, which is why David teed up his question about being mission driven. We have staff that advocate passionately for every project. There's really no projects that my staff tee up that are terrible projects that just make no sense whatsoever. They all have some validity to them, but the reality is we can't do them all. Our work is very complex. And I'll get into some of that as we go, but I'm sure most of you can appreciate just by nature of the type of work that we do, that these are very complex projects, and it can be very difficult to explain to a lay audience or to our donors exactly what we're doing, how we think we will have impact, and how different projects compare against each other and their ability to drive big conservation impact. So it was important to us to figure out how to focus our work and be able to clearly communicate to our donors for purposes of fundraising why we're doing the projects we're doing, why we're not doing other projects, and how we know that we're going to be able to deliver big benefits with the dollars that they've entrusted to us. We knew all of this was going to take a culture change just in the way we look at our projects. And there was already a big culture change going on in our organization, which I'll talk a little bit about in a moment, as we've broadened our agenda over the years, from land to a much broader agenda and to a focus that extends beyond just thinking about nature, but also thinking about benefits to people. So there's tons of culture change going on in our organization that we're trying to work through while we're doing this decision analysis and portfolio management. So all of those challenges ultimately made it very difficult to make decisions within our organization, which was part of the reason we were doing too much with too little, and was also making it difficult to achieve alignment with the staff on where we were choosing to focus. So these were some of the early observations that myself and my colleague had coming into our roles that we wanted to start tackling. And I think I'm going to hand it back over to David to tee up our next poll.
Yeah, so I thought it would be helpful to see kind of how much people share these kinds of issues. Are profits and nonprofits actually that different? So I've got a poll up here with some versions of the challenges Temperince has talked about. Go ahead and please select all that apply in your organization. So the poll's open. And got a few votes are coming in here. Go ahead and take a vote. Yeah, I see them coming in. Got a few more coming in. It's still jumping around as people vote. All right, if you would take another 10 seconds, if you want to vote, go ahead and put it in, or I'm going to close the poll in a second here. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, closing the poll and sharing the results. So pretty much everybody faces the problem of too many projects, not enough resources. That's universal, I think, everywhere between pretty much every company. Then the next one, 67%, focusing on biggest impact or value for money, followed by, that's 2/3 of you, followed by half of you comparing the impact of different projects or making aligned decisions. Although at least 1/3 of the people share the other two challenges as well, passionate advocates advancing the mission and dealing with culture change. So I think some of the approaches Temperince has taken will probably be pretty relevant. With that, let me pass it back to you, Temperince.
Well, great, and those were definitely interesting results and encouraging to me to realize we are not alone. Others struggle with some of the same challenges we do, like the too many projects, not enough resources, and really getting at ROI and impact for the value of the money. So that, as David said, hopefully some of the things we'll cover in the upcoming slides you will find relevant to the challenges that you're each facing. So with those challenges in mind, why did we decide to do decision analysis? It may seem somewhat obvious, but just to kind of underline it, we wanted to find a tool that would allow us to evaluate our entire suite of projects, to prioritize our work, and to ultimately make transparent, evidence-based decision-making. We really wanted our staff, our board members, and our donors to be able to see why we made the decisions that we did. So fortunately for me, my colleague, Louise Sarlozano, had worked with SmartOrg and recommended we engage with them using their decision analysis tool. So we started down the path of using strategic portfolio management, a process that really allows us to iteratively evaluate our existing and proposed projects in a comparative framework. And one thing that was really great about this was not only the opportunity to, do initial analysis and really re-baseline ourselves in terms of figuring out, based on our current portfolio, what should we continue to focus on and what should we drop, but also allows us, as new project opportunities come up on the horizon, which for us happens all the time, gives us a tool by which we can bring those new potential projects into the mix, evaluate them alongside the other projects we've been considering, and really start to see how things shake out. So in light of the challenges, which I'll touch on a little bit more, and the decision to proceed with the decision analysis, I'll talk a little bit about the approach that we chose to focus on once we engaged SmartOrg. So again, our challenges were demonstrating how our funds will be deployed to have the maximum impact. We have some very sophisticated donors at the Nature Conservancy who make very large gifts to us. And they want to know that their gifts are having a big impact. And oftentimes they want to see data and extensive information to demonstrate that we're making wise decisions in getting really big impact on the ground. Another challenge that I mentioned earlier was a big culture shift for our organization, which was moving from focusing just on nature. So previously we had just, as we evaluated projects, we asked ourselves, what are the nature benefits of these various projects? And we made our decisions strictly based on the benefits to nature. And now we have this dual focus of making sure we evaluate benefits to nature, but also benefits to people. We really want to maximize the number of people that are benefiting from our projects. And that was new territory for us at the Nature Conservancy. It required new language, it required new metrics, and in many cases, it drove us to new and different types of work, or modifying from the types of, modifying our existing projects to do a better job at benefiting people. So this was a really big shift for us as an organization, and this process allowed us to move ourselves through that shift in a somewhat systematic way. As I mentioned, prioritization is difficult. I'm sure we all find that to be the case. It certainly is in a passion-driven organization. And it was critical that we had a comparable framework. And easy to argue that it was impossible to compare our projects. But the reality is it wasn't. We did find a way to compare across these very different and in some cases divergent projects. So our approach was to define a decision context that covered the bulk of our spending. Not everything we do is captured in our portfolio analysis, but the vast majority of it was. We had to radically simplify our metrics. As scientists, we are exceptionally good at developing super complex metrics and delineating the nuanced differences between things. But really, in order to do this type of portfolio management, we needed to simplify our metrics and try to find a way to put all of our projects on common ground and to have a similar measuring stick. So we had to really simplify the way we approach things to do that. We defined and distinguished products that delivered value, which was kind of new terminology for us as an organization. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, but really getting clear, not about what projects we were doing, but what product we were delivering to our customers, which in our case is our donors, that meant something to them, that was tangible to them. And then we obviously wanted to systematically evaluate our projects, and really importantly for us was create a forum for great decision conversations. And we certainly nailed that in this process. We are now having much better decisions, and I'll get into some of that as we progress. So this presentation is organized to kind of cover three big results that we felt that we got from our work with SmartOrg and our decision analysis process and portfolio management process. So the first one was really getting clear about what guides our decision context. What is relevant to our organization when we're trying to make decisions? What should we factor in? So the SmartOrg team did this great exercise in this case with the Caribbean chapter, not with the Florida chapter, but with the Caribbean, to try to get at what things should be decided, guiding our decision, what values guide our decision as an organization. So after a very collaborative workshop exercise, the team ultimately landed here and came up with this graphic to show where they had in essence reached consensus around the values that guide our decisions as an organization within the Nature Conservancy. So the first one was our heart. And in this case, our passion, our heart drives us to think about nature and people thriving. That is our vision for the planet. So our passion always drives us towards thinking about nature and people thriving together. Our head drives us to be pragmatic. We know as an organization, and since our inception, we have focused on pragmatic solutions, win-wins for the environment and for people and for our economy. And then the last one is our habit. So within the Nature Conservancy, this is an internal methodology that we refer to as conservation by design, but it is in essence the internal vocabulary and approach we use to developing our projects and executing on them. So it's our internal process and a habit that all of our staff are trained in. So at the end of the day, it really takes all three of those value systems interplaying to help just drive our decision discussions. Another huge breakthrough for us regarding our decision context, which is probably would not be a huge breakthrough for the rest of you. And I suspect for many of you, the for-profit companies is a pretty normal practice. But for us, it was a big distinction that really helped us move forward in this process, which was delineating, from our major body of conservation work, recognizing that we have two types of work. We have production projects, which are things that we can reliably do now, that we really know how to do well, that we've been doing for years. So for the Nature Conservancy, a great example of production work would be our land deals. We are exceptionally good at land deals. We've been doing them for almost 70 years. We know how to deliver them. We know how to measure progress. We know what the milestones are supposed to be. That's work we can confidently deliver. But we have this whole new array of work within the Nature Conservancy that is new to us. And in reality, it's innovation. It's in essence our R&D work as an organization that we aren't as familiar with, and we need to manage differently, because in the case of innovation or R&D, we have a hypothesis about something that we think can happen if we do X, Y, Z, but we need to prove that that hypothesis is true. So we need to really test some things to figure out if our hypothesis is true, how much impact will we have, and how difficult is it to actually execute on that hypothesis. And as a result, we need to manage those projects differently. The amount of investment we make in our innovation or R&D work would look different than the investment we would make in our production. And how we manage those projects and the questions we're asking our project managers should really be different. Yet we had just kind of mushed those all together and we're treating them the same. So when that light bulb went off in the process, it really helped us start taking all of our projects and separating them into these two distinct buckets, and then having very different decision conversations around those projects as a result of making that distinction. So that was kind of the summary on the first result, which was getting really clear about what factors into making our decisions before we began our portfolio management process. The second big result was the process that we went to develop our evaluation methods, just so we could subject them to the portfolio management exercise and put them in the tool. So we had to develop some methods, and even development of those methods helped us improve our projects along the way. So let me elaborate a little bit on what I mean by that. So one of the evaluation methods that we had to come up with in this process was to develop standards. We actually developed standards at that product level. So keeping in mind is product is what we're delivering to the world or to our donors, like a clean and functioning forest. That's a product. And there are different ways different ways and places we can deliver that product. But it's important that we get clear with ourselves about what we mean by a protected and well-functioning forest. And it's important that we get clear with ourselves in what time frame we expect to achieve that outcome. And so developing standards across the board for everything we were evaluating in our portfolio became really important to us. It was not an easy process for us because, as I'll show you some of the examples in a moment, these are very complex projects. And it was very easy for our, very bright scientific staff to argue, oh, well, this, the bar is different for each of these, or it's too complicated to explain. And we really had to dig deep and convince ourselves that we could indeed come up with a consistent set of standards or expectations for our similar bodies of work, and that we could hold ourselves accountable to certain timelines in which we expected to see certain outcomes. So this was a really important part of the process that took us some time, but that not only helped us with this first round of evaluation, I think it will continue to help us going forward on all of our work in the future. And the benefit of working collaboratively with our Caribbean colleagues in this was that they made some headway on some things, we made some headway on some things, and we were able to share our progress with each other and help each other move along more quickly with this rather complex set of work. The other thing that we did was we documented our assumptions along the way in the system, and going through the process required us to get really clear about what our assumptions were. So our project teams and project leads had to sit around in groups and talk about what their assumptions were that had led them to create a project and to plan to execute on a project in a particular way. And that allowed us to question those assumptions when sometimes those assumptions really needed to be poked at and improved. And it allowed us to document those assumptions in the system so we have that documentation to fall back on and revisit as we need to on a going forward basis. So both of those were really helpful. And on the next slide, I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean by standards in the case of our project. So I suspect this looks like a whole bunch of science environmental mumbo jumbo to most of you. But the idea, again, for each of our products is that we wanted to deliver a certain outcome. And we needed to set a standard for ourselves that said, this is what we mean to get to a successful, viable product. If we get this much done in this time frame, we can call that successful. And anything less than that, or in a different time frame, is not our, does not reach our threshold or bar of success. So for example, in the world of the environment, that meant defining, if we're trying to protect marine systems, like is reflected in the first set of columns here, these are marine managed areas. If we're trying to protect a marine system, at least 20% of the marine environment needs to be protected in a certain way for us to consider that success. Or in the case of a forested watershed in the second column, at least 50% of certain portions of the system needed to have native species in them for us to consider that a good, well-functioning forested watershed and to consider ourselves successful in that. And in these cases, you can see all of these had to be achieved by 2025 in order to, make the cut, so to speak, and hit the bar. So again, very important for our scientists to converge and agree on what the definition of success and what the timelines were going to be that we were going to compare all of our similar projects to. And the last big result from this process that we went through, and an obvious one, building on all that we've done to date, was actually evaluating our projects, getting the data entered into the system based on all these language development and tool development that we had done, and actually make decisions about which projects we should focus on and which ones we should move away from. So that was huge for us and was the entire point of getting into this exercise. So we were able to focus on outcomes for people and nature. So I mentioned earlier that was a big culture shift for us. And in this process, we actually developed, and I will show you, we developed metrics for people so that we could evaluate both impacts to nature and people and really compare the results for both of those. We ultimately delineated the bulk of our work that we evaluated into 3 distinct portfolios. I already mentioned 2 of these. The first one was production. Again, that's the work we're good at and we know how to do. The second one was innovation, or R&D, the things we're testing in the areas we're trying to move into. And then the last one was capability, which was basically our baseline work, our standard operations. So for an organization like ours, that meant things like our monitoring programs, our grant management teams, or our contract teams, or our fundraisers. All of those are essential capabilities that we have to have in-house in order to get out the door and deliver big conservation outcomes on the ground. But those 3 different types of work need to be managed differently within our chapter, and they're going to be budgeted differently and evaluated differently, and making those distinctions will really help us with our portfolio management in the long run. This process allowed us to better align with the larger organizational objectives and make sure that our chapters in Florida and the Caribbean were doing the best job possible to help move our larger organizational goals forward. And we were ultimately able to look at output, which I'll show you in a moment, in a lot of different ways that allowed us to evaluate and make decisions on our projects based on their benefits to nature and people, the cost of various projects, our capacity, our existing capacity to execute on various projects, risks. We were able to factor in risk and make risk adjustments, and we were able to really evaluate our return on investment. So all of those different ways of looking at our projects really helped inform our decision making well above and beyond what we had been able to do prior to getting into this. Okay, so here's one of the first outputs I wanted to share with you. I'm sure most of you have seen similar types of outputs of your own data. In our case, so this is arraying different projects. In this case, these are projects that the Caribbean chapter is considering or already implementing based on evaluating their nature benefits and their people benefits. So we were able to look at both of these, and you can see on the graphic that some projects, fall along the x-axis, meaning great benefits to nature, not a lot to people. Some fall along the y-axis, lots of people benefits, not a lot to nature. And we're obviously looking for as many projects out on that upper right diagonal, meaning they're providing maximum benefits to people and nature. So this really allowed us to start looking at each of these individual projects and figuring out which ones were delivering maximum nature and people benefits. The next graphic allowed us to look at impacts versus probability of success. So as I mentioned earlier, we have some projects we have more confidence in, other projects where there's more risk and uncertainties. And we were able to do this quadrants analysis to really array our projects and see which quadrant various projects fit into. So, and again, I'm sure most of you have seen this types of analysis. We're really looking for those pearls in the upper right-hand corner that are going to deliver, in this case, big nature benefits. So lots of acres, hectares of nature benefits and have a high likelihood of success. So the pearls are big winners, and we want to make sure we keep those in our portfolio. But we also kept some of the bread and butter and some of the oysters in, because some of these projects had some good benefits as well and made the opportunity to improve them a little. Moving on. We were also able to look at return on investment. So in this graphic, we were able to see cumulative benefits. So the y-axis is cumulative benefits to nature. So cumulative hectares of nature protected against public and private funding. How much does it cost? And so this allows us this gives us an idea of which projects give us the highest ROI, the most benefits to nature, or we have comparable graphics for people at the lowest cost, and really start to see, how the ROI starts to tail off in the tail of the graphic. So the projects out on the far right in there would not be projects we would want to move forward from a return on investment standpoint. So I know there's a lot to look at on the screen, but I'll explain. So basically we showed all the output that I just shared with you and a lot more output within a workshop format to our team. We really familiarized, David worked with us and our team to familiarize them with all of this different output. We had computers in the room, we had graphic output on the walls, and then we divided our staff up into teams and we asked them to use the output to take all of our projects and decide whether the project should be kept, we should transition away from the project, whether we should reformulate it, or whether we needed more information. So we then divided into these sub-teams and asked our staff and managers to use this information to make some recommended decisions. And so the output that you see on the screen is the results from when the Caribbean went through that exercise. All the projects that are above the bold line there were projects that each of the teams, so Crystal, Eleanor, and Vera represent teams. Those were the projects those teams felt were worthy of continuing. The projects in yellow needed modification. The projects in red, the teams were recommending we transition out of. So this was a very enlightening exercise and kind of put some of the recommendation control in the staff of hands along with the data, and really helped us start teasing out a final suite of decisions that myself or the executive team could make about which projects to include and which ones to transition from and which ones to reformulate. The projects in green were the ones that all of the teams agreed on keeping. So those were the ones there was complete consensus around the need to keep. I won't spend much time on this graphic other than to say this is the same exercise done by the Florida team with slightly different color coding, but the same idea. What are we keeping? What are we getting rid of? And what are we moving into our innovation portfolio? Because we need to be managing it differently. So this was an incredibly helpful exercise for our team that ultimately led to a final suite of decisions and a suite of projects that we are working or have already worked to transition out of. And I think I'm going to hand it over to David to hit on our next poll.
Okay, great. So if you look at the kind of results that Temperince and the Nature Conservancy were to get out of here, which one might apply to you? They did quite a bit of work clarifying their core values and getting clear on their decision context. So that's the first one. The second one is they evaluated their they used evaluation methods to look at and compare all their projects on a systematic basis. And then they used a kind of social group process to really get through and to get clarity on what decisions actually should be using that data. So go ahead and check all that would apply to you. Where's something you might be able to use from what she's done. So I see people are still coming in here. We've got the last few coming in. So if you make your last vote, I'm going to close the polls in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and now we can see the results. So strategies evaluated and decisions made. So it sounds like it's that last step where you brought the group into alignment and had people compare and got some real agreement on what should be cut and what shouldn't. So that's most of the participants. And then 2/3 of them both would find it valuable to clarify the core values to decide decision conversations and improving the evaluation methods and the projects. That first one is particularly interesting to me because at the beginning, most people said they were traditional for-profit organizations where you'd think the core values would be clearer. So what are your thoughts, Temperince?
Yeah, I agree. I think that is a bit interesting. I'd be curious to see if anyone can, when we get into the Q&A, if they have specifics on what that means in a for-profit context. But Certainly it was highly relevant in our case and really did make a difference to setting the right stage to move forward with.
Great.
I'll go ahead and
So,
I've got a few more slides and then I can wrap up if you'd like.
Yes, and I would just remind people, go ahead and put any questions in the question box, and we'll be taking a few questions in after she wraps up here. So just a quick reminder to do that if you'd like. All right, take it away, Temperince.
Great, and like I said, I think I got 3 slides left, so I can wrap up fairly quickly. So just wanted to hit here at the end, so having gone through the process, what challenges did we experience or do we see going forward? And then what are some of the positive outcomes from the process? So to start with challenges, buy-in and operationalizing was one of our challenges, although I think we made big headway here. Our staff felt like we've been through lots of planning processes. We've done all this before. Well, we'll just go back to business as usual soon enough. But I think they realized that's not the case. This wasn't just another planning process. It is being used to drive decisions, and it is something we will continue to do. We had to spend a lot of time also on the other side of the coin, comforting staff that, this process was a viable one, and it didn't mean everybody's project was going to be phased out or that it would make them irrelevant, that it was just going to inform decisions and that we would have a long time to talk about what that meant for various bodies of work. We did run into challenges developing the metrics, particularly the people metrics. 1, because that's super complicated, and 2, because we'd never tried it before as an organization. So we were really doing some pretty cutting edge work. We made good progress. I think there's still room for improvement, and recognizing that you've got to have metrics your staff believe in or they won't believe the results of the analysis. So it's important to get buy-in on your metrics. Jargon, so TNC already has a tremendous amount of jargon and vocabulary of our own. Some of this portfolio management language was a bit new to our staff, so we had to educate them and kind of crosswalk it to some of our own internal language. It takes time. This process takes time, but it's one of those garbage in, garbage out types of exercises where the time that you take on the front end, getting clear and putting in good data and making sure everyone's well calibrated and approaching it the same way, it ensures that you're going to have better and usable information on the output. So it takes that time for reflection and peer review to get it right, but it's worth the effort. In the case of Florida and Caribbean, we managed the system software centrally because we were trying to move through this very quickly. It was a practical decision, but it did mean that some of our staff were not as involved in looking at the system and how the system actually works. So they felt a little more distant from it than others on the staff did. But that, I think, is easy enough to fix. Some of the positive outcomes. A really important positive outcome is focus. We're doing less better. We were just way too overwhelmed with the previous body of work, and we weren't able to move the needle quickly as a result. And now we're able to focus in more, get more done on the projects we've agreed to focus on, and improve work-life balance for our staff. For us, an organization driven by passion and mission, having this type of tool and process equalized the passion, and it got us into more objective discussions instead of subjective ones. It really allowed us to use quantitative data, which scientists love, to make informed decisions. As I mentioned earlier, developing standards was really helpful for us. It created better organization and expectation management, as well as made us get clear around time bounds for our projects. We were able to incorporate uncertainty. Uncertainty is a big issue for scientists, and it was important that we could capture uncertainty in this analysis so that we were able to move forward with less than perfect information. Otherwise, our folks would have just kind of had us spinning that, well, we don't have the perfect answer, and I can get that for you in 5 years. We don't have 5 years. We need to make decisions now based on the best available information. And then lastly, I can't say enough about going through this exercise with our colleagues in the Caribbean. It was hugely beneficial in building camaraderie between our chapters as we went through this together. We were able to co-learn and iterate off each other, and it just made a huge difference for us, not doing this in isolation. And then my last slide is simply to say this was incredibly valuable to us, and we have a vision of continuing to use this approach going forward in three big ways. As a tool for our executive team to make decisions on a go-forward basis. We are always put in the position of deciding between projects, so we want to operationalize this and use this on a regular basis with ourselves and our donors. We want our project managers to start managing their projects in light of what we learned, with a bigger focus on life cycle management, getting clear on metrics and standards, and really using this whole mindset to develop better projects from the beginning and to better manage those projects towards success. And then lastly, we kind of piloted this project within Florida and the Caribbean, but we think that this effort we've been through, really thinking about innovation, is going to help our larger organization with the big culture change that we're going through, to shift our culture and really think more about innovation and operationalizing an innovation pipeline. And with that, I am finished and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Temperince. I've got a few questions here teed up. The first one is from Ellen. She says, a big problem for us is when we cancel projects, people keep them going. And you look like you canceled a lot of projects and got some focus going. How did that work for you? And to the degree it was successful, what made that a success for you, to have people actually let go of canceled projects?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, we too had the same history of, people claiming to walk away from things that they were still investing time in. So for the projects that we put on the transition out of list and made the conscious effort to do that, we made the we had each project manager develop an actual transition plan. So they had to develop the steps of what it would take to transition out of it. And then we're holding them accountable for walking through those steps. So if that meant, in our case, finding another partner to take the work on because we didn't want the work to drop, then they had to develop a plan of who they were going to talk to and how they were going to engage and finding a partner to take on the work. Or if it was just that we were going to drop it and we needed to inform certain people that this was no longer going to be happening, then they had to develop a plan to do those notifications and an end date by which they were going to stop investing resources in the project.
That's great. I guess that's a different thing than many traditional organizations, or maybe it's similar, but since you work indirectly through others a lot, there's a whole web of people and other organizations and donors that need to be part of the wind down. You can't just walk away from a conserved piece of land. You need to sort of set it up for good stewardship in a way, right? So this is a more
exactly, which is the argument. Yeah, and it's the argument staff make for never dropping anything. It's like, well, everyone's counting on us to do this. And, I hear that, but we've got to find some other folks that can step up in some cases. So yes, it is complicated to transition away, but it can be done, as we've proven.
Great. And okay, so then I have a question here from Nina. She wants some more insight into how you measure the impact of the project, commercial organization, it's sales or NPV or something like that. But you mentioned radically simplifying metrics. What did you actually use and how did that work for you?
Yeah, and I glossed over that a little bit just for the sake of time. But in our case, and it was complicated to come to agreement, but I think what we landed on really worked for us as a first step. And I think we have an opportunity to improve and refine this over time. But in essence, we figured out the hectares, or I'll just say acres, the acres of impact that we would have for conservation. So if we were doing a land project, we would say, and this land project's going to protect 10,000 acres. Or if we were doing a marine project, we would say this project's going to protect 10,000 acres of a marine system. So we tried to take every project and calculate an actual acreage of nature benefit, meaning nature was protected or well functioning or whatever we defined in those standards I mentioned. In the case of people, and again, this was new territory for us, we calculated the number of people that were benefited from the project. And we actually looked at both direct and indirect people benefits. So people that would directly benefit from the conserved resource or would have employment because of the restored resource were people that we considered to be directly impacted. people that were a few steps away, maybe somehow were involved in an industry that were a few steps away from that, but would be benefited. We considered those indirect impacts to people. But we, in essence, calculated the number of people benefited by each project, and then we could array our projects based on acres of, conservation impact or number of people benefited.
Yeah, I would just comment on the nature benefit as a little elaboration on this. The science folks had all these things going on, and there was a kind of metaphor of just, you're going to go to a donor and tell them what part of the map you're going to color in if they donate, right, as somehow improved or better. And that was radically simplified and allowed for comparability, and I think really dramatically improved your communication also with the donors. So it kind of fit in a good spot, if I recall correctly.
You are correct. Yes, we have a tendency to want to overcomplicate things when we talk to our donors and lose them along the way. And so it really helped us with coming up with a simple way to communicate project benefits to our donor base.
So I have one last question for you. This is from Harry, and it's sort of a pair of questions. Maybe you can speculate or say, you're a nonprofit, right? And you got ideas from for-profit organizations. What was the most impactful idea you adopted from a traditional organization? And what do you think is the most interesting thing you did as a nonprofit that might be relevant to traditional companies that are trying to do better on their missions?
That's a great question. I guess on the traditional, this one's easier for me, like what do we adopt from for-profit? There was probably lots of things, but I would say, well, I'll say two, if I can have a two-part answer. The first one was this distinction between production and innovation, really recognizing that R&D projects should be treated differently, which I think is a very common practice in for-profit, and was just not, we did not even talk about our work in that way within the Nature Conservancy. And the second was really thinking about ROI in a dollar-driven sort of way. It was really arraying our projects and saying, how much is it going to cost and how much are we going to benefit? We were not doing that in such a sophisticated way, and I think most for-profit businesses definitely rely on ROI as a decision-making parameter all the time. On the other end of the question, in terms of what we did as a nonprofit that has relevance, I suppose based on your survey question, actually the value exercise. We talk about our values a lot as a nonprofit, but it was still important for us to map it and remind ourselves of it as we made decisions. But it sounds like maybe that's something based on the survey results that some for-profit businesses maybe need to do a better job of, having, really open conversations about the values, even the ones that may be most obvious to you, but maybe some of the ones that aren't bright lines in your, mission statement, but that do factor into your decision making, or that should factor into your decision making. Yeah, David, I don't know if you have anything to add.
That's a great way of thinking of it. I would take one more step. It's not just understanding what the values are in a kind of abstract way, but you took the additional step of developing metrics to help drive your decision making based on those values, so that you could see kind of progress in the context of what choices you had to make. Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. I want to first thank Temperince for joining us on this and giving us this fabulous presentation. I also want to make a little plug for the Nature Conservancy. I'm a member of this personally. One of the things I look for in my charity and mission I believe in, and I'm a great wilderness lover, and also effectiveness. And the TNC has a long reputation of being very effective with their donations, and exercises like this give me confidence that they're going to continue to meet the challenges, the increasing challenges of preserving all the stuff that's important to us. So just make a quick plug and encourage you to donate. Go to their website. You can become a member or donate there. So with that, let me thank you again. Thank everyone for joining, and we'll sign off. Have a great day.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.